So I've realized recently that I've been doing a lot of videos that delve into different topics within social permaculture, but I've never really done a video dedicated solely to exploring what the term social permaculture actually means. So that's what I'm going to do in this video, and if you're interested in learning more about that, then stick around. Hey, welcome back. So as I mentioned in the intro, we're going to be dedicating this video to exploring the topic of social permaculture and what that means. Now I suggest if you're super new to permaculture and you don't really know what it is, maybe read a little bit about it or go watch a couple of YouTube videos before you proceed with this video. Because I'm going to be assuming that most people watching this have at least a working or basic introduction to the concept of permaculture. Really quickly, I'll explain it in its most basic definition, I guess, and at least my definition of it. So it's an approach to design where designers aim to create functioning ecosystems. It's essentially a pair of glasses that people put on, and when they put on these glasses, they see everything as belonging to a system, and they're able to put things together in such a way that they work to create harmony and stability within their given systems. Now, this approach has traditionally been used in landscape applications like farms and homesteads, backyards, or even, your back porch. But generally, it's been used in food and materials producing systems. But more recently, permaculturists have recognized that a lot of the ethics and principles guiding permaculture are completely applicable to any kind of systems, including social systems. So the world of social permaculture is really devoted to exploring how these permaculture ethics and principles can be used to understand and design social systems. Now, I like to think of permaculture as a language. I studied languages in my undergrad, so I use that as a point of reference for a lot of things. And, people always say when you speak different languages, you sometimes have a slightly different personality in every language. And I feel like it's that way with ways of knowing. I consider permaculture to be a way of knowing. And for me, the ethics of permaculture are almost like the grammar that you use to string together the words. And the words are made up of the permaculture ideas and the principles, and you can combine them in these new ways and innovative ways to create new sentences or new iterations of what permaculture actually means. And I think that's a really cool way to think about it, because a lot of people refer to permaculture as a pattern language. So it's a way of knowing that's based on recognizing patterns and putting those patterns together in ways that create systems that function really well. So when I reframe permaculture ethics in the social sphere, I like to transform them into I statements. So the three ethics of permaculture are earth care, people care, and fair share. And for me, when I'm using them in social permaculture, I like to use I care for the earth, I care for people, and I don't take more than I need. I think this really helps to ground permaculture in the I, or in the person, and apply it to the way that we walk through the world. And then of course we use the permaculture principles both as a way of seeing what's around us and understanding what's around us, and as a way of designing the social systems that we're a part of. And this can really include anything from our personal relationships, our families, social entities like schools or businesses or organizations or even governments. So a couple of simple examples. I'm going to base these off of David Holmgren's 12 permaculture principles, which a lot of people are most familiar with. So I actually have my little notebook here, and I wrote down a couple of ways that I personally use the permaculture principles in my life. So for example, one of the most common principles used is integrate rather than segregate. And I wrote here, integrate rather than segregate reminds me to seek common ground with people who have different views than me. And that's been one that's really important in my life. And I feel like in the lives of a lot of people who do things against the grain, who do any kind of activism or participate in social movements or alternative approaches, it's really, really important to find common ground with people who do things differently. Otherwise, you're going to be working in a little bubble. And for me, that's not the way that I think change can happen. So you have to learn how to integrate your views with the views of other people and really understand where they're coming from and how you can overlap. Of course, in the traditional sense, integrate rather than segregate is the idea of when you're designing a system, you're going to think about how each element fits into the system rather than just saying, oh, I want a plum tree, so I'm going to put a plum tree. I'm going to think about how does this plum tree interact with what's already in my garden, and how can I make it interact beneficially with what's already there. So that's kind of the idea. Another example I have is the permaculture principle, use and value renewable resources. So I wrote here, use and value renewable resources helps me to use what is already available to me to meet my needs. Example, secondhand. So yeah, I use this principle a lot in my life. I personally like to live simply and with not very much money, because I just find that that's the most natural way for me to be in this world. And in order for me to get my needs met, I have to look to my community, my friends, and the items that are present in my life and ask myself, how can I use those in the most smart and efficient way so that the majority of my needs will be met. And as the example I gave, buying secondhand clothes, I don't like to spend a lot of money on clothes, but I still like fashion and expressing myself through what I wear. So I've chosen to buy the majority of my clothing secondhand. So it's super simple. And I think a lot of people are already employing this. So it's nothing novel or new. It's just a way of understanding our social worlds. My third one here, this is probably my favorite permaculture principle of the 12 David Holmgren principles, which is use edge and value the marginal. And so in ecology, the edge is the edge of an ecosystem or an ecological community. And it's essentially where two communities or more touch each other. And so the edge is that zone of overlap. And it's usually referred to as the most productive, the most ecologically interesting zones, because it's like two worlds coming together, like almost like two cultures overlapping. So you see a little bit of each, and you also see things that you don't see in either of them. So a lot of really unique and interesting things happen ecologically in these margins or edges. And it's really the same in our social environments. For me, I am stimulated by hearing people's stories who have lives that are really different to mine. I also love interacting with people who speak different languages than me and learning different languages. And so it's one that I've definitely applied the most in my life. And I've written here, use edge and value the marginal reminds me to venture outside of my comfort zone in order to grow and learn. So I actually kind of did a whole video about how I interact with this principle, use edge and value the marginal, and I'll link to it below so you guys can check that out, because that's definitely one that's been super prominent in my own life. And again, I think it's really applicable to anyone's lives. This idea of, venturing outside of your comfort zone and exploring what's a little bit uncomfortable, because usually if it's uncomfortable, it's a really good opportunity for growth and learning. So I wrote here that permaculture is about understanding complex systems, understanding how complex systems work. And it's really understanding the role of each element within the system. Example, plants and animals in food-producing systems. And then allowing each element to be 100% itself while forming beneficial connections with other parts of the system. And that's a little bit wordy, but just as an example, this example is used really widely in permaculture. They usually talk about integrating chickens into the landscape. So our approach, if we're using animals and landscapes, would be to allow that animal to express all of its given behaviors. So in the example of a chicken, if you have a chicken in a factory farm in a little cage, all it can do is sit, stand up, eat, or lay eggs. If you brought that chicken onto a permaculture design, you would have to look at all of the different behaviors that it exhibits and allow it to do those behaviors, because that would be allowing it to be 100% itself. So chickens peck, they scratch, they do dust baths, they like to roost, they like to climb, they like to clean their feathers, they like to be social, they like to be warm. They have all these needs and behaviors that would need to be met in a permaculture system in order for that element, the chicken, to be inserted in that system in the most beneficial way. Beneficial for it and also the rest of the system. So you might consider putting your chicken out into your garden before you plant, which allows the chicken to scratch up the soil and peck out the worms. And there's so many examples of this, so you guys can look on the internet. I'm not going to delve into it super deep here, but just to give you an idea of the kind of approach that permaculture designers take. So what does that look like from the social side of things? So when we're designing with social permaculture, I wrote here, how can I place myself in my social environment so that my needs are met and I help meet the needs of others, and I'm allowed to be fully myself? So I think that's a really good way to encapsulate social permaculture. It's integrating different principles into the way that we express ourselves in the world. So if you think about those three spheres integrating, and at the intersection of those spheres is my ideal way of being in the world. Or if we're not talking about a single person, an organization's ideal way. You could think about it when you're, for example, I work for a nonprofit. If I was starting my own nonprofit, I would think about, how can this nonprofit have all of its needs met? How can this nonprofit meet the needs of its target demographic? And how can the people in this nonprofit be allowed to express who they are through the work that they do? I think it's a really useful social tool. This can be used, again, in so many different social circles like jobs, economics, and educational settings. And I'm actually developing a whole module on the economic side of things, because that's a huge part of social permaculture, and I don't want to dive very deeply into that in this video, but it's super exciting because I get to develop this whole 3-hour module on alternative approaches to economics, or rethinking economics, as part of this online permaculture design certificate that is being taught exclusively by women. And we have close to 40 women who are all developing modules for this amazing online permaculture design certificate. So if you guys are interested in learning more about that, I'm going to put some links in the description of this video and you guys can check it out. I'm also going to have an affiliate link if anybody wants to sign up through me and have me be the person who reviews their permaculture design and sort of guides them through the course. So you can do that as well. Thank you guys so much for joining me for this video. It's one that I've been wanting to make for a while now, and I've just been putting it off because I've been really busy, but I'm happy that I had today to make this for you. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to comment below and reach out, start a conversation. I'd love to hear from you. And I will see you next time on Permaculture Perspectives. Take care. Bye.